You got an interesting story here. I think you've been researching UFOs since what, 1986? Are you still with MUFON?
I am. I'm
Okay.
a member. I don't actively work with them. I still speak at some of their, you know, monthly meetings or the yearly conventions.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm a field investigator. I took their test many
Okay.
years ago.
Gotcha. And I was looking at your site. You've written, well, I think 30 books. I saw the whole array of the catalog of them. It looked pretty exciting. I can't wait to dive into those. Before we jump into all the interesting questions that I have, how did you get into this? It's kind of a fringe industry or field of study. Not many of us are interested in it, although that's changing now. But how'd you get into this?
Yeah, well, kicking and screaming involuntarily, dragged against my will to a certain extent. I mean, I'm kind of kidding, but kind of not, because I was a skeptic. I didn't believe in UFOs. I thought it was a ridiculous subject. I of course thought that possibly there was extraterrestrial life out there, but couldn't be visiting our planet because I'm very into astronomy and science, and I know how far away the stars are. And I had all these what turned out to be false assumptions about UFOs without ever having done any research. I was pretty sure it wasn't real, but that did change. I can pinpoint the exact date, actually. It was November 17, 1986. And there was a very famous sighting on that day. It's very well known in the UFO community. I don't think the general public knows much about it, but in brief, it was this Japanese commercial airliner flying over Alaska who had two very large UFOs, much bigger than their jet, paced them for about a half an hour or more, actually. And of course, they all saw it, the whole crew. There were people on the ground who saw it. It was on their radar. It was on the FAA's radar, though they later denied it. We found out that was a lie. They knew that this was real, but none of this was actually in the news report. They just kind of joked about it. I mean, this was 1986. The subject wasn't as popular as it is today. And I remember just looking at this pilot. They showed his picture, Captain Kenji Torochi. I thought, this poor man, he's deluded. He's seeing a reflection off the ice cap. That was what I thought, not even knowing what he actually saw. But it interested me because I thought, this is a pilot. He should be smart enough to know what a UFO is. And it interested me enough just to sort of think about the subject a little bit more deeply than I ever have. And I remembered that my older brother Mark had said he'd seen a UFO. That was when I was, 14 or 15 years old. And this is 1986, so I'm 21. Still pretty young. But I asked him about it. I went up to Mark and I'm like, tell me about that UFO you, quote, thought you saw. And he described this incredible encounter. I mean, it was really amazing. He was driving with his friends and saw a metallic disc, colored lights all around it, a little dome on top, silent, treetop level, and chased it down Reseda Boulevard in Southern California. This is outside of LA. So that's kind of how it started. I'm not sure. I believed him. I knew he wasn't misperceiving, but it was a lot to wrap my head around. And he's like, well, if you don't believe me, ask Phil, ask Greg. Those were his friends. They were with him. And so I did. And that's how it started to really unravel for me because I found out that my sister-in-law had seen UFOs. She had two friends with her. I ended up talking to one of them. We had family friends who'd had sightings. One apparently had missing time. Stupidly, I brought it up at work. I worked at a business office doing data entry. And the lady whose desk was right next to mine, I know her really well, described how her whole family saw UFO. And her daughter was seeing gray aliens. And in walks Dorothy, another lady I love at work. She's unfiltered. She's like, oh yeah, one follows home from the library. It's like, it's weird because we live 5 minutes from the library and we got home and they left at 9. She says it was already 10:15. I don't know what happened to the time. Because now by that time I had picked up Bud Hopkins' book, Missing Time. So I knew what missing time meant. She didn't. So yeah, this was bad news as far as I was concerned. I was upset. I was scandalized. My family and friends and coworkers were lying to me. That's how I looked at it. This wasn't being taught in schools. There was a government cover-up. Yeah, it kind of knocked me flat on my back. And that's when I joined MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. About a year or two later, I became a field investigator, started interviewing people, going to conventions. I bought every darn book I could find, joined every group I could find, and very quickly took over my life.
That's awesome. So when you first got into this, were there stories like there are now? Because it seems like a long time ago, or 20 years ago, it was like oh, we saw something in the sky. Maybe it was a UFO, maybe it wasn't. It's like a close encounter of the fifth kind, I think they call it. Versus now, I mean, I just interviewed a guy who's been interacting with aliens since he was 5 or 6 years old and doing astral travel and things like that. Are you seeing more of these personal relationship stuff versus the just sightings, or has that been around the whole time?
I honestly think it's been around the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah, but people weren't talking about it. In fact, every time, I won't say every time, but very often when I interview someone, they say that I have never told anybody this. My family doesn't even know. There just wasn't any real recourse for people. The subject wasn't appearing in the media that much. It was right when I got involved in this field that there was shows like Encounters and Sightings. And the only other show that I can think of prior to this was In Search Of, back in the 70s, which did explore the subject. I remember watching it once and thinking, no. But yeah, I think it's been going on the whole time. Though I will say, what's happening now is somewhat unprecedented in human history. Because if you go before the modern age of UFOs in 1947, thereabouts, which was, of course, the Kenneth Arnold sighting at Mount Rainier in Washington, the Roswell UFO crash in New Mexico. This was part of a super wave of sightings that was unprecedented. There was a few accounts in ancient history and moving forward of waves of UFO activity, but nothing like we see today. And it really wasn't, in the 50s, it was mostly sightings. There were a few, quote, contactees saying that they've had contact, but even UFO researchers weren't really looking at them. They were just interested in sightings, and people who reported humanoids were considered a little crazy. But that changed quite a bit when Betty and Barney Hill came out with their story. They, of course, had a missing time encounter in 1961 in New Hampshire. So then, yeah, it started to come out a lot more, particularly in the 1970s. But if you look at these accounts, the people I've interviewed, yeah, they were having experiences since they were little kids, going back to the 40s and 50s and 60s. So I think it's always been there. It just was not really recognized. But now that the subject is so popular, people have the courage to come out because other people are talking. They have places they can go, a platform to share their story. So yeah, I feel like it's ramped up a little bit, and at the same time, it's become more popular.
Okay. How do you differentiate between people that might be trying to fool everybody versus real accounts?
Yeah. Well, once you kind of get your legs on the subject and interview a number of people, you start to realize, because I came into this kind of untaught, I really just kind of dived into the deep end and had to learn how to do that, interviewing skills and vetting a witness, so forth. And I learned pretty quickly, because you do get calls from people who are very jokey or off the charts, weird, or even recognizably disturbed, mentally ill. My mom was actually a marriage, family, child counselor, so we had a lot of psychology books, and I was always, as I said, interested in science, including psychology. So that did help a little bit, but I learned how to do it. Basically what I do is I'll take a report from someone, and it's usually verbal, some face-to-face if possible. But these days, with Zoom and so forth, you can talk to people digitally, or however you want to, virtually, and see them. But yeah, I'll take their report, not record it, just take notes. And if it's a incident that's worthy of study, you can tell that they're not seeking attention. Then I'll follow it up with a recorded interview. But yeah, there's little things you can do, because if someone's asking for money, no, I don't. I've never paid for an interview, and I never will. That's a conflict of interest. And more often, people will say, you know, please don't use my name, or I've got a good job. I have no history of mental illness. You know, I'm well educated. I don't do drugs. That gives some caveat, and often they're very reluctant to share their story, particularly if it's, you know, firsthand contact or being taken on board, because they don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be disbelieved. And after you talk to, say, 100 people, which I have hundreds, you start to be able to predict, to a certain extent, what people are going to say, because the contact experience does follow a pretty set pattern. And by that, I mean, we know what the inside of a UFO looks like, the types of ETs people report, what they're wearing, the instruments they hold, the things they say, the sequence of events. And there's little details that even today aren't super well known, which can help you verify an account. And of course, you just vet a witness by getting references, seeing if you can find any evidence to support their story, do fact checking on everything they say, and so forth. So yeah, there's a whole process that you go through.
That's just good old detective work.
Exactly.
Seems like it. So what do you think of the recent events in the news with David Grush and Greer and the US government whistleblowers coming out officially and all that stuff?
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I met Stephen Greer back in the early 1990s and was part of his CSETI group, where you go do close encounters of the fifth kind to try and call them down. So I've known about him for a while, and he shifted to disclosure, pushing that. And I think he's done very good work. He's one of the guys who really spearheaded this. Yeah, I think he's doing amazing work, and we really do owe him a debt for bringing this forward to a lot of members of Congress. And I'm really actually pretty encouraged by the recent disclosures that are going on. And I'll put that in quotes because it's not disclosure. Our governments, our sitting governments, the Pentagon has not said one word of saying UFOs are real, really. I mean, we did have the congressional hearings. And they did say, yes, there's validity to this phenomenon, but we don't know what it is. I don't believe that for a second. I think they do know. The congressional hearings, which were the first ones 3 years ago. Well, they're not the first, obviously. There has been a couple of others in the past. We did have Project Blue Book throughout the 50s, 60s. And well, it goes back earlier than that, Project Sign and Project Grudge, but became Project Blue Book, which said there's nothing to this. If you think you saw a UFO, you are mentally deluded. You are misperceiving, or you are lying. That was their go-to, which is, of course, what the Condon Committee and the Robertson panel found out. And those are all the 3 official government studies that were of any import at all. And that's changed. I mean, we have a 180-degree turnaround now since the recent Pentagon, or the congressional hearings at with the Pentagon officials, Daley and Moultrie. That was encouraging, but they lied throughout it. They said, have you ever shot at a UFO? They said, no. Well, that's not true. We know that's not true, and it's demonstrable through documents that are absolutely official, released through the Freedom of Information Act. Yes, we have shot at UFOs. They were asked about the Malmstrom incident. And if you've been in this field, you know what happened in Malmstrom in 1967, when UFOs came and hovered over a nuclear missile base and basically shut down the intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear missiles. And they said, we have no reporting on this. I mean, I laughed out loud when I heard that, because these are the head of the Defense Department. They know. So I just don't find that credible. I thought it was completely ingenuous. And it was, the whole hearing was like that. Now, recently with Grush, Grush and Graves and Fravor, these 3 gentlemen actually gave their testimony before sitting members of Congress. That was unprecedented. And talking about crashed UFOs and ET bodies, I was actually impressed. That hearing went much farther than I thought it would, honestly. To hear sitting members of Congress say flat out, there is a government cover-up. I'm like, whoa, that we have not heard before, and calling for an end to it and saying the Pentagon is not cooperating with us. Like, wow, okay. This was just talk. This is not action by any means. So I'm not can't really call this disclosure. I think the end game of disclosure would be seeing the craft and the bodies. And we're not seeing that. I suspect we'll see more photographs, little blurry ones, maybe a piece of metal. But until we, that's not going to impress anybody. Not today's society. They need more than that for full disclosure. But definitely a huge step forward, and it's bringing a lot of people into this field. And those 3 witnesses are just 3 in a long line of people who've been doing this and trying to get people to listen. So there's hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of these whistleblowers and military witnesses who are waiting in the sidelines. So yeah, it looks like a real sea change. I'm hoping that it leads to a lot more, but I'm also skeptical because our government has covered up from the beginning. Their history on this is heinous. They're still lying. There's still a cover-up. So I'm not sure that they ever will voluntarily, I'll underline that, will disclose. I think honestly what we're seeing now is because they have to do it to remain credible and relevant. Otherwise, we know they're lying.
Yeah, it is a big step in the right direction because, there's a lot of people out there who won't believe something unless it's said by an official source, like the government, if you can call that official, or the news or whatever, media platform that they watch. The officials that so the government cover up, do you think that they're covering it up because they think that it will collapse society if people find out that, oh, there's life on other planets and they're more intelligent than us? Maybe that affects with religion and things like that. Or do you think that they're just trying to keep weapon systems and advanced technologies private?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. Ultimately, I think the government cover-up is for many reasons, and this is a certain amount of speculation and a certain amount of just based on what I've learned from reading and talking to whistleblowers myself and other researchers, because the cover-up was put in place years ago, back in the 40s. So this has been the policy from day one, and they've painted themselves a bit into a corner. I think it's ultimately driven by power and greed and money. And yeah, like you said, they want this technology. I don't think for a second this is going to cause a panic or a collapse of society. Contact, I've done a lot of my research directly with contactees, and it can be very spiritually impactful and will cause people to sort of move away from structured religious thought and become more spiritual. But honestly, I think the real reason behind the cover-up is because the threat is not to humanity by any means. I don't think the ETs are here to take over or hurt us or scare us or anything like that. They've been around for millennia. The ET threat is to the power elite, their power structure, their control over humanity. It's a threat to their jobs, their money. That's why they're covering it up, because it would change everything if suddenly people realized we are not alone and we are being lied to. And I mean, it would cause a complete shift in the way humanity views itself and each other. And I don't think that they want that. They're trying very hard to cover this up, brutally cover this up, because it's a huge threat to the fact that they have control over humanity. And this technology, which is frankly unfair, it's not theirs. This is something that all humanity deserves to share, not just the Illuminati or the cabal or the power elite or the 1% or the military industrial complex, the secret government, the folks behind the cover-up, which is just a small number of people who are trying really hard to hold on to their wealth. That, I think, is the reason behind the cover-up.
Do you think there's any credibility to a fake alien invasion in order to sell the fear narrative?
I do. That's certainly the buzz in the UFO community. And I'm really worried about it. I'm hoping that this subject has gotten enough publicity that people are aware of it, what you're talking about, a fake ET invasion, because we do have some of this technology in terms of reverse engineering. I mean, there are craft flying around, especially today, that are not ET, but you would think they were. So they have the capacity to fool people, and not just with reverse engineered ET craft, but holographic technology and drones. You've seen what drones can do these days, or holograms. It's incredible. It would fool anybody. So I think, yeah, this is a real possibility. I'm worried about it. We can see the signs of it already. There's very much an ET threat narrative being put forth. There's a subject called MILABs, military abductions, in which people are basically victimized by what I believe is the cabal faking ET abductions and making them very negative. When having interviewed many, many hundreds of people, I don't think that this is a horrific experience for people. It can be traumatic. It can be very scary. But the sequence of events when people have direct contact and are taken on board a craft is very encouraging. It's all about healing and warning and guiding and waking people up. This is why they're contacting people. And we can get into that more, but yeah, I am very much worried about our fear-based media. There's a media cover-up in the subject. They're putting forth lurid, scary accounts when that's just not the truth of ET contact. Yes, as I said, it can be scary, but they're not here to hurt us or kill us or eat us for lunch, despite what our government may be putting forth. They're the ones I'm worried about. And you can see this in the history of their actions, not just with this subject, but across the map. Our governments throughout the world have been mistreating the population for hundreds of years.
Yeah, that seems to be a common trend throughout history. So what is the truth behind actual ET contact? If it's not something fear-based, you mentioned healing, you mentioned providing information, awakening, things like that. And what are some good examples of that, if you have? Yeah,
certainly. My first book was called UFO Healings, which outlined 100 cases of people who've been physically healed. I mean, everything under the sun, everything from, in minor injuries, head colds, stomach aches, back aches, kidney stones, cancer. I recently put out a larger book, a reprint, basically, of 300 cases. So it became, that apparent to me very early that the contact experience was being badly misrepresented. It is, if you look at the sequence of events objectively, what happens when someone is taken this on board, the most common thing they will experience is being examined. And this is when often a healing takes place. And I can tell you unequivocally that this is true because every major researcher out there, almost without exception, has these cases. And we're talking about them. And I can list them. They are John Mack has a bunch of cases, David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins, Edith Fiore, Yvonne Smith, Barbara Lamb, Tim Beckley, Brad Steiger, Philip Mantle, Timothy Good. I can go on. They all have these healing cases. And I'm like, why is this not being talked about? Because this speaks to who these ETs are and why they're here. This is one of the main reasons people are taken on board. It's to collect our genetic material, to preserve it, because we are experiencing an existential crisis. Species go extinct every day. The planet, the whole biosphere is having real problems because of the way we're treating our planet. So this is one of the main things that the ETs are doing. This is one of their agendas, which I think is very encouraging. It speaks to their benevolence. And it goes beyond that, because this is what most people experience is a physical exam, but it's terrifying for a lot of people who are, naturally fear-based, because that's kind of the world we live in, unfortunately. So a lot of people will have missing time at this point because the ETs aren't wanting to scare you. And if you're in a complete panic, we're like, well, this person's not ready. And they will put them back, and they'll have no memory really, except for bits and pieces. And they may go under hypnosis to recall this. And what they recall is this exam. They're like, that's enough. That's all I want to know. Stop. And it ends there, when really it doesn't. Because having talked to a lot of people who've moved beyond that and faced their experiences head on, this is when you start to realize what is actually going on here. Because they will take you down to the engine room. I've got so many cases of this, and they'll show you how the craft works. They will explain it to you in detail. There's case after case after case of people who've really absorbed this knowledge and are filing patents for free energy motors. I mean, Yvonne Smith has a case from John Long, high school education. He's super interested in magnetic motors. There's case after case after case like this. They're showing people how to move away from fossil fuels and how their craft work, which is usually along the sort of idea of free energy or electromagnetism or harnessing the magnetic gravitational lines of our planet. This is how they fly. So that's one aspect, which is, again, very encouraging, very positive. Another is they'll take you up to what I would call the observation deck. Now, this can happen anywhere because they can turn the side of the craft transparent and you can look out, or the bottom, often that happens, or more often it's the top of the craft and they'll show you a huge field of stars. That's most common. But also they'll show you the Earth far below. And like, oh my gosh. Or the moon. I've heard that many, many times, even to the planet Saturn. I've got 4 or 5 cases of that personally, and I know others. So this is another sort of positive aspect. They basically give you a tour of the craft. They will take you up to the control room. This is so interesting to me because I kept getting cases of this. And after you hear it 10 or 20 times, you're like, okay, this is clearly happening. And if someone's not reacting complete fear, they will sit you down in the seat. It's like, here's how we fly it. Would you like to try it? And I have case after case of that. My book, Symmetry, about a witness by the name of Dolly Saffron, they trained her how to fly the craft. She's had lifelong experiences with them doing this. And I know that may sound unusual to a skeptic, but Grant Cameron, a Canadian researcher, just put out a book called Sky Pilots, outlining some 60 or 70 people who have had this exact experience. I'm like, yes, I have several of those cases. So this is another positive aspect. And then it moves to the more spiritual aspect of it, which a lot of researchers have not covered because they're very much focused on the nuts and bolts and trying to prove this, which is difficult if you bring in levitation and walking through walls and telepathy and precognition and all the stuff. But I can tell you hands down that the vast majority of contactees have a basic sort of mini enlightenment or a spiritual awakening, a psychic awakening certainly, and come away from their experiences. And this is more the rule than the exception, with the ability to do healing, hands-on healing, or some form of healing. They become doctors. They're environmentalists. They become start doing astral travel. This is very common. Physical levitation. I've got case after case of this. People physically levitate after an encounter. Bud Hopkins had cases. Stephen Greer talked about this happening to him. Whitley Strieber, Jacques Vallée. It's not just me. There is a very strong psychic aspect to this. People come away with mediumistic abilities, contacting spirits, or precognition. It goes down the line. And just one final point is the warnings and messages that people get. And this is why I'm like, we have to take a second look at this, contact phenomena. It's not negative. They're doing their best to help us. They're waking us up psychically, but they're also warning us. And if they talk to you, if you get a message from ETs, I can bet it's going to be something along the lines of, why are you messing around with nuclear materials? You are doing something that could destroy all life on your planet, will permanently pollute your planet, make it unlivable. And this comes up over and over again. And it goes beyond that. They warn about our warlike ways, the greed, the violence, the aggression, the divisiveness, politics. They've warned people against politics several times. There was one lady I interviewed, they told her flat out, stop supporting Ross Perot. She was a huge Ross Perot, advocate. And they said, don't. If you're a part of the political system, you're a part of the problem. It's all going to collapse. There's going to be a civil war. If this continues, don't be a part of it. So they will warn against pollution as well, the destruction of the environment, the use of fossil fuels, all of this. And another example would be a gentleman who's a Navy medic, Kevin Kamin, who was taken on board and met praying mantis type ETs. And they said, when you started using nuclear weapons, you created a countdown clock. And because of this, these events will happen, and there's nothing you can do to stop them at this point. And they showed him all these hurricanes. Mostly it was hurricanes, but it was earthquakes, it was landslides, it was tornadoes, just disaster after disaster, tsunamis. They showed him having a personal motorcycle accident with a serious head injury, which of course did happen. So these are the kinds of things that they're telling people. They're warning them. You cannot convince me that these ETs are here to eat us for lunch, because it's just, the evidence doesn't support it. If you look at the first-hand contactee cases in totality, because there's disinformation, misinformation in my labs and fear-based thinking, you will see that this is actually good news for humanity.
Yeah, I think you're right. And, I happen to believe that all of the institutions, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the institutions that we have in our society now are corrupt, and they're going to be, something else is going to take their place. We look at, you mentioned politics, you mentioned, we've also got, the energy industry, the environment, all these different things that are essential for society to operate. A lot of them are built on old paradigms, and with ideas like this coming out and potentially new technologies and things like that, we can set things up. I think it was you who mentioned that the ETs didn't have government.
Right. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, exactly. We really shouldn't need government. A moral, ethical, spiritually advanced society should be able to take care of itself without being governed. The government is kind of like, and here's an analogy. I remember when I was a little kid, we came upon speed bumps, and I was shocked. I'm like, Mom, why would they build a road and put bumps on it? That seems absolutely, counterintuitive. I didn't use that word, obviously. I'm like, that's dumb. Why would they do that? And she said, well, that's because people speed. I'm like, well, what do you mean? She says, people don't have the knowledge and the foresight and so forth that this will hurt people. And that's kind of what government is. It's a speed bump, because we are not behaving in ways that are moral and ethical and responsible. No, the ETs, I have zero evidence of a quote galactic federation, despite what some contactees who are very prominent, a few of them, are saying. I've never talked to anyone who said that. There's no money, there's no federalized system, there's no king or queen or anything like that. No, as near as I can tell, they're all cooperative. All the different ET types, everything is telepathic. They all communicate, they all cooperate. So I don't see any evidence of wars or anything like that, really, or conflict. So I find it very curious that some of these people who are on the lecture circuit are saying these things. They're what I would call outliers, or disinformation artists, perhaps, or just plain deluded. I don't know. I don't want to name names or anything, but that is not the contact experience. No, these beings that are visiting our planet, humanoids of all types, are very much like us in many ways, more like us than different. But they have an advanced society that has moved beyond money and are able to cure all these illnesses. And yeah, we ourselves have a lot of work to do because we're being basically paralyzed by certain industries on this planet, which I will name. I have no problem saying that these are the guys on my naughty list. It's the insurance industry, it's the banking industry, it's the energy industry, it's the secret government, but not the elected officials so much, who are corrupt in a lot of cases, but I think there's a lot of good people within government. But the highest levels of the military are sitting on this stuff. The military industrial complex are not elected officials. So it's very hard to, and a lot of them are not even government. This is corporations. So it's a real problem that we're facing. And hopefully, ETs have obviously moved way beyond that. If they have the capacity to travel across the entire universe, they're not going to come down to little Earth and torture people. That makes zero sense. They are coming down because they consider us their friends, their brothers and sisters, their children. That's how they look at us, as people who need help, and they're intervening to the degree that they can without violating laws of karma. And I'm using that word on purpose because they do. They have said it to witnesses flat out. We can only do so much. You have to solve your own problems.
Yeah, it makes sense. And, I think the catalyst that really is going to change everything is the democratization of free energy in a decentralized format. Because, how do you control people? You control them with fear, with scarcity, with atomization. And if everyone has access to unlimited resources, then they will probably stop fighting each other for the most part. People will still do it, but if you're not trying to survive, you're not going to go take something from someone else, or if you don't think that someone's going to come and take your thing, then you're probably not going to attack them. So I think that'll actually stop a lot of the wars, and then also strip the power away from these centralized institutions, unelected officials, like you said. So the ETs, they could fly around anywhere in the universe. Why are they so interested in us? Do they have a vested interest?
Well, I can only tell you what everything we know about the ETs comes really from one source. It's not government. They've lied about it. It's not the pundits on TV or the scientists who've never even researched this subject and are really just speculating. It comes from the contactees. Everything we know comes from people who have seen UFOs, met ETs face to face, or been on board. And so, yeah, I think the reason that they're so interested in us is because the main message that contactees get, one of them, is that we are related to them. We are them. Contactee after contactee has told me the same exact phrase, pretty much, with slight variations, but the ETs tell them, we are you. You are us. We are one. We share a common heritage. I hear this over and over again. So they feel a sense of moral responsibility to stop their children from blowing themselves up, burning themselves with matches. And a parent, here's an analogy. A parent can only do so much. Someone has to learn that the stove is hot by actually touching it at some point and burning themselves. You cannot tie your child's shoes for them. They have to learn how to do it. They have to learn how to ride the bike. They have to get a job. They have to do all these things so they can guide to a certain extent. Here's why I think that this is not me speculating. This is what the evidence shows very clearly. Because in 1947, in the mid-1940s, this is when we started exploding nuclear bombs. This is when we finally had the capacity to completely destroy ourselves. This is when we started polluting every darn river and lake on this planet. DDT is in all organic material now because we're not thinking clearly, or perhaps this was intentional. I don't know. That is horrifying to think about, that this was not a complete accident, because there's some evidence of that in terms of how we're being treated as a population. But this is when the ETs came in large numbers. This is when they realized, oh gosh, we have to step in here, because if we don't, this population is going down the wrong path and will annihilate themselves. So they come in and do what they can without landing and taking over, because that's not going to help us. That will not teach us a darn thing. It's absolutely up to us to solve our own problems. We made our bed. This is our fault. We've elected leaders who don't have our best interests in mind. We've set up a system that is corrupt and money-based and fear-based. So it's really up to us. But yeah, they're stepping in to the extent that they can, because they feel a sense of responsibility and kinship. You have to remember, all the ETs out there are humanoid. Some look exactly like us. And if you talk to the contactees, this is what they're told. The Greys, in fact, are human. They're all human. We all share the same genetic heritage. This is why they're so interested in us. This is why when people are taken on board, they sometimes, we see ETs coming down, collecting all the plants, pulling up animals, collecting people, taking their genetic material. They are doing their best to preserve and save. Some experiencers call the ETs gardeners. Some call them watchers, doctors. They have all these labels for them, because this is what they're doing. They're doing, their behavior falls under the same umbrella as human behavior, except it's skewed much more towards the positive. They're doing what they can to help. And it always kind of saddens me when people portray these guys as evil invaders, because if they wanted to and take over and annihilate us, they could very easily. It would be game over in a day, less. And we're not seeing it. That's us imposing our own cultural values onto an unknown without doing any research, because that's what we do. That's how we behave. We are very distrustful, very paranoid, killing each other in large numbers. And it's not entirely, the people's fault. It is time for everyone to wake up. But let's face it, when we have corporations funding both sides of a war, giving weapons to both sides and encouraging divisiveness, how do you react to that? That's difficult to pull yourself out of. The ETs are doing the best they can, and they are showing themselves too in large numbers. Disclosure has happened. It really has. Look at the many, many waves of encounters that have, in 1947, there was a huge wave. 1965, a massive wave. Everyone was seeing it. 1973, an enormous wave of sighting. And you can point to various cities like Hudson Valley had a huge wave, Wytheville, Virginia, Gulf Reese, Florida, Topanga Canyon, California, Belgium. France had a wave in 1954 that left zero doubt to anyone living there at that time, including the government. In October of 1954, you can look this up, that ETs were real. They have showed themselves over and over and over and over again. And the amount of evidence is mountainous. Landing traces, radar evidence, healings, implant evidence, animal reactions, electromagnetic effects, angel hair, a weird substance that sometimes is emitted as a byproduct from UFOs flying over, has been studied in scientific labs. It's good, hard evidence. Evidence is there. Disclosure has happened on part of the ETs. So it's only the fact that our government has been so brutal and vicious and ruthless with trying to cover this up and taking our tax dollars in large numbers. Most of our tax dollars is used to cover this subject up and make witnesses look like idiots and fools and liars and drug users. You can see I'm passionate about this. It makes me angry. When I found out UFOs were real and this is what was going on, I was floored. I still can't believe it. It's why I still do this. People need to know this is not, this can't go on, this cover up. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. And, you're right. Disclosure has already happened. Community disclosure. What we're waiting on is the government to come out and basically to catch up and say, oh, yeah, you're right. All of this has happened. And that may never happen.
Doing it. Because they're being left behind and they don't want that. Sorry.
No, you're right. So are ETs interdimensional beings? And if they are, what's the difference between them and other interdimensional beings, spirits, angels? What, take your pick.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because there seems to be a resistance to the idea of simple extraterrestrials, people like us, biological beings from other planets. Let's face it, the idea of that, ETs, classic ETs, is inescapably logical. Because we here are living on a planet. We know this. We know we have a star. We know there are billions upon billions of stars out there. There is no way we're alone. It's absolutely inconceivable. And when you see the UFO phenomenon, you look at all the evidence, the ET theory, and I hate using that word because I think we have the evidence to say that this is ET. Just look at the crash retrieval reports. If that's true, well, all bets are off. We're dealing with extraterrestrials, flat out. A lot of stuff gets put under the UFO umbrella that might not belong there. But I think the majority of what people are seeing are classic ETs. Now people are bringing up all these different theories. Oh, they're interdimensional. I'm like, well, hold on a second. What do you mean by that? Where's your evidence? Why would you say that? And people will point to some of the illogical or symbolic aspects, or the things they don't understand about ET contact, like high strangeness aspects. Because that does come up, weird stuff that's almost incomprehensible. And they say, well, or like ETs disappearing, or these objects moving at right angles. That defies the laws of physics. No, it doesn't. It defies our understanding of physics. It doesn't mean they're breaking the laws of physics at all. And when someone says, well, they're interdimensional, I'm like, well, what isn't? What form of life on this planet does not have an interdimensional aspect? Look to quantum physicists. Look to, the fact that we ourselves are interdimensional, because you can go out of your body. There is another side. There is life after death. And it's been demonstrated, provable, very easily through reports of near-death experiences, mediumship, accounts of ghosts and spirits, channeling. It goes beyond that. The evidence for life after death and the interdimensionality of humans and animals, and frankly, all life forms, is very compelling, to the point that it's, I think, conclusive. All entities are interdimensional. So I'm not so sure it's helpful or useful to start labeling ETs as interdimensionals, because what does that mean? We're all interdimensional. And I've certainly looked into time travel theory as well, because people are saying, oh, it's us from the future. And you can march out a smattering of cases that might support that, but the totality of cases doesn't come anywhere close to proving that. ETs do have the ability to time travel. You can call them time travelers, because there are cases of people who've been taken to what they believe to be the past, or even shown future events. So that does come up, but it's not, all of this is true. They are interdimensional. They are time travelers, but they're still extraterrestrials. And one theory which just, I don't understand it, is a theory put forth by a number of major researchers that we're not dealing with extraterrestrials at all. That this is an interdimensional intelligence that's masquerading and putting on different masks and is pretending to be Bigfoot and a near-death experience and ghosts and all of this. And it's this one phenomena that is imposing upon humanity to sort of monitor its and guide its belief systems. And this is a very anthropocentric theory. It's very much like, oh, we're the center of the universe, which has never worked out in human history. It's always fallen by the wayside. They cannot explain it mechanistically. Like, who is this intelligence? Where does it come from? How does it manifest a UFO? If that were true, why aren't there pink elephants flying around and every darn thing people, that goes through people's imaginations? I just don't find that theory at all credible. I think a near-death experience is a near-death experience. And I think a Bigfoot is a Bigfoot. If you look into the evidence of Bigfoot, and I've researched all these paranormal subjects in depth, demons, angels, all of them. They are what they appear to be. This is my assessment. I think there's been some conflation of these phenomena. There are people who probably had angelic encounters and labeled it as UFO, but probably more often reverse. People who, seen a glowing being and label it as an angel, and perhaps it's not. But yeah, I think there are angels. There's no doubt there are demonic spirits. Don't think the UFOs are demonic, despite what a good segment of the fundamentalist religious population says, oh yeah, they're demonic. And so is that ghost of your Aunt Sally. And so is everything. That's a school of thought that's prominent. And if you look into the demonic hauntings, yeah, they follow a very set pattern. It's not anything like what happens with UFOs. Demonic spirits are out to destroy you and hurt you. And we don't see that with ETs. They're healing people. That's not what demons do. So we have to be very careful when we're putting labels. We love labels, of course. And it helps us to clarify our own thinking on things. But I think it can be a mistake because it narrows your thought processes. What comes first is the evidence, not the theory. And I see a lot of shoe fitting and cherry picking in this field. And they're pulling evidence to support their theory. That's not how you do science. You look at the evidence first. And the evidence shows that this is extraterrestrial. And yes, there are interdimensional spirits. There are, no doubt. There are all kinds of supernatural creatures. You can see this in every culture across this planet throughout history, whether people are talking about elves or fairies or gnomes or kobolds or all manners of nature spirits. So yeah, there's different stuff going on. And I think that's why it's confusing to people, because they're saying, oh, maybe this is ETs. No. Some of this isn't ET. But when someone sees a saucer land and it leaves a burn mark on the ground that you can test at 3,000 degrees and has landing, holes in the ground, and a person is taken on board and they're missing, they're not in their room. And they come back and they have a little bruise and under x-rays show an implant and we're healed of a chronic condition. It's pretty obvious what's going on here. So I don't understand the resistance, the idea that we're being visited by ETs, because that's what the evidence is showing us.
Well, I think a lot of it is fear. People who are not open to this are probably very afraid of it. And if it were shown to them that it was real, that might shatter their belief systems and paradigms, and they would be kind of in a limbo state in terms of what they believe, and that's very disruptive. Yeah. Well, same. Me too. Yeah. And it's not fun, is it?
No, I was actually physically ill, nauseous from it, because this subject strikes right at the core of our belief system of who we are. It's like religion. It's like politics. And it's very, very difficult for people. No one wants their worldview shattered. So this is why I think skeptics would just, look the other way. I've interviewed people who told me over and over again, I don't believe in UFOs. I'm like, just tell me what you saw. Well, it was this saucer and it followed us home. But, I don't believe in this. I'm like, that's okay. Or another lady, she's like, I'm sure this is a demon. I'm like, just tell me what you saw. She said, well, it was this little figure. It was standing on my bed. It had a skinny little body and a huge head. And I'm like, okay. She had no, education, no recourse. Because there weren't a lot of books back then. There is now. But it can be very difficult for people because we have a tendency to view this phenomena through the lens, not only of fear, but through our own belief system. So if this is something that's completely out of your purview, of your worldview, you almost can't see it at times. I mean, you can see this. Jalen Hynek talked about this, the father of modern ufology, guy from Project Blue Book, noticed that people go through what he called theory escalation when they see a UFO. And it's funny because I hear witnesses talk about this, like, is that a shooting star? I've experienced this myself. You know, is that a firecracker? Is that a helicopter? Is that a plane? Is that a balloon? It's getting closer and closer. And then they see that it's something that they don't know what it is. And this is especially true if you see an ET. So people will be like, is that a deer? I think I saw an owl. Because they don't know what an ET is. This happens, you know, contact often happens when people are little kids. So they'll have these figures come into their bedroom or have a face-to-face encounter outside or, you know, in the car or wherever. And they don't jump to the ET explanation because they've never heard of UFOs. And this is where a lot of screen memories come in. And I've heard them all. 3-foot-tall teddy bears, superheroes, Barbie dolls, vampires, monsters of all kinds, goblins. I've had like 5 or 10 people tell me that they had Muppet nightmares, nightmares about the Muppets, because, you know, they had those big staring eyes. And so the are screen memories of, you know, Muppets, scary Muppets. Every time I hear that, I'm like, oh my gosh, here we go again. Those are screen memories, which are closed.
Are screen memories our projection of belief onto an experience, or is that something that is provided by the ETs?
I think it comes from us ultimately, mostly, but not always. I think sometimes, you know, I wrote and, you know, researched the alien clown connection because there was a bunch of cases that I had of people who said they had weird, scary clown-like figures coming into their rooms when they were kids. And Bud Hopkins talked about this, Peter Huff, an English researcher. I brought it up at Barbara Lamb. She's a researcher. I went to her support group several times. And I'm like, how do you guys feel about clowns? These are all the contactees, right? And I might have set off an atom bomb. No, it would have had less of an effect because they all started screaming. Like, oh my God, I hate clowns. Fear of clowns in our society is huge. Chlorophobia. I saw a lady on TV. This is just a mainstream program. A clown walked by. She fainted dead away. She has that much fear of clowns. I'm like, I bet she's a contactee. Because they would do that. They would come dressed as clowns thinking, this is going to reduce the fear factor. Because they don't want to scare people. They will present themselves sometimes as something that's familiar to you. There was a lady who was a horse farmer, you know, a rancher. The guy, the gray, came up in a 10-gallon cowboy hat and a little pasted on mustache. So yeah, we do see this, but it's basically coming from us. And sometimes people will just come away with that memory because their belief system doesn't have room for an ET. It's just not there. And so this is a way, I think it's a two-way street. But yeah, owls are a very common screen memory, deer, all manners of things. I mean, it can be just about anything. So it's ultimately, I thought at first it was the ETs, and I've kind of come around the other direction. Like this is actually us doing it to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think you're right. Have you ever done astral projection or lucid dreaming or something like that?
I have. Actually, I got really into it.
Okay.
And I thought it was kind of a synchronicity. This happened to me personally right when I started investigating this subject.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's probably definitely a synchronicity. So I think, well, as you would know, when you're in that state, it's sort of a thought responsive landscape. So if people are maybe dreaming or they're in that half awake, half asleep, sleep paralysis state, they could very easily project something onto an experience that's happening, or make it up, I guess, if as well. I mean, I've had dreams where, like I hear a noise outside in the physical universe, and then in the dream, there's something happening with that noise.
Yep.
So yeah, I think you're right when it comes to us projecting onto the experience. So that's interesting. So I've heard a lot of these accounts where people have something comes into their bedroom and they're sleeping. Don't you think there'd be a better place to surprise us than in the middle of the night when it's dark and we're sleeping? I mean, that's what I would think. I certainly wouldn't want something to come to me then, even if it was benevolent, because it's just an odd, weird time. What do you think?
Yeah, I've had a lot of people say the same exact thing. Like, why would they come into my bedroom at night? I'm sleeping. This is my sacred space. This, I talked to Dolly Saffron about this, and she's a contactee, was fully awake, moved past fear, has not needed hypnosis. And she said that there's a number of reasons for this. It's a lot easier for them to fly at night because they use our magnetic fields, which are much more chaotic during the day with the sun interacting. That's one thing. And they are less likely to be monitored and tracked by our government. But frankly, they are able to reach people, know where they are, and get them in a place where they're not encumbered by clothes and jewelry and other people. They're more open. They're more ready to be. They're not being all distracted and engaged. So I think there's a number of different reasons for it. But yeah, I can certainly sympathize with people who feel like, why at night? And it does happen during the day. It absolutely does. And it doesn't always go as well as it does at night, because people react in as much fear during the day as they would at night. So it's very difficult for the ETs to overcome our own super fearful reactions. And the first thing ETs will say, and you will see this in almost every account of face-to-face contact, is don't be afraid. Have no fear. You're fine. We're not here to hurt you. No harm will come to you. Don't be afraid. Over and over and over and over and over again, you hear this. Which is another, I think, reason why we need to listen to what's going on here. Yeah, I mean, I get that people don't want it coming into their bedroom, because boy, that's scary. That just absolutely flips people out, freaks them out when you have a gray up at your bedside. But they have to reach out to people. This is their mission. They're trying to help. And as near as I can tell, people who do have contact aren't being kidnapped against their will, despite the fact that they may feel this way. And I don't want to impose my own beliefs on anyone who's having their experience and interpreting it the way that they've experienced it, because that's their experience. But I can tell you that the vast majority of people I've talked to did feel that way in the beginning, but move away from that and realize, okay, I did agree to this. Because we compartmentalize, we deny. People have had experiences their whole lives and didn't realize it because they denied it. They explained it away. They did not face it. They physically compartmentalize. We have, our subconscious. So the ETs are talking to all of us. And there's a part of us saying, get away, you're scary. Who are you? I don't like this. Where another part of you is saying, gosh, look at that. They're here again. Wow, I love this. They're here to help me. And so this is why ETs are trying so hard to wake people up psychically. This is one of their big goals, their missions, their agendas, is to get you to start using your psychic ability, your intuition, your telepathy, your clairvoyance, all of it, because then you will realize, like, oh my gosh, they're not hurting me. They're healing me. Oh my gosh, this person is lying. Here's corruption. So it's a tough road for both sides. ETs are trying real hard to not scare people. I remember Whitley Strieber wrote about this. He was taken on board and he's screaming his butt off. He's an absolute cold panic. And the ETs were surrounding him, and they said, "What can we do to help you stop screaming?" And that took him off guard. And he said, "Well, you could let me smell you." And they did. And that grounded him in reality. So yeah, people have a lot of fear surrounding this. And I get it. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I do this. Most of the people I talk to, I don't write about. They just want some counseling, some information, confirmation, some help. How do I deal with this? So yeah, I always tell people, if you're having these experiences, first, take a step back, recognize that you're okay. That if they've hurt you, I'd like to know how. If they've helped you, I'd like to know how. Write down your experience. This can be very therapeutic and will help clarify your thinking on what is actually happening to you.
Yeah, I think the fear phenomenon in human psychology is a block to not only remembering stuff like this, but also spiritual development. I think there's a lot of overlap between the two. And one of the reasons why I brought it up in relation to the astral projection is that I remember I would spontaneously, from a young age, start to do low-level astral projection automatically. And I found that it terrified me because I couldn't move. I was floating, moving around. And as I got older, I started to realize that the fear was what was blocking me. And if you can get past the fear, not that I'm a master at this or anything, but all of a sudden now you can start flying around. You can actually control the environment to some extent. So the fear is like a form of being excited. It's an excitatory state. So any kind of excitatory state sort of destabilizes everything, and then the fear blocks a lot of stuff as well. So I think it's really important that people learn how to face their fears when it comes to this type of stuff. So if you do see something in a dream or in an astral state or in the physical reality in your room, it's okay to be afraid, but try to control that, and don't just jump to it's a demon or it's this or it's that and it's trying to eat me or something. Maybe try to interact with it and control yourself. And you might find that you'll have a more enlightening experience.
Yeah, 100% agree. Fear is a teacher. And it's funny because when people fear, they're projecting future events often, not what's actually happening. Because I've had people say, "Oh, this was so evil. This was so bad. It scared me so bad." I'm like, "Well, what did they do?" "They were standing there looking at me." I'm like, "Oh, okay." "What happened?" "Oh, that's it." But I'm like, "Okay, let's talk about this." Yeah, I know about that fear from astral projection myself, and it is absolutely a block. It's one of the main blocks of doing astral projection. Fear, laziness, and skepticism. That's what's stopping people from astral projecting. And it's absolutely something everyone should try to do and move past because it's so worth it. It is so amazing the things you can do. And that's absolutely true with the UFO phenomenon as well. You can move past the fear. This is when the ETs will be like, "Oh, let's celebrate. Thank God you got past this. Now you get to, we can talk to you." And let's face it, we are immortal beings. And you can learn this yourself if you do astral projection. Your first really unequivocal out-of-body experience will show you that there is life after death. And the universe is actually safe. And you are an immortal being. You cannot be destroyed or hurt. You might experience pain. You might experience unpleasant things on Earth. But ultimately, the universe is safe. You are indestructible. Fear is an illusion. Love is the force that should guide people. Love and truth, not fear and hate and divisiveness, which is a lot of what people are dealing with right now. We need to step into love and leave fear behind because it's an illusion. It's very spiritually enlightening to move past the fear state. I was very fearful after my mom passed away in 1984. I'm like, "We're all gonna die. This is horrible." And then I found out UFOs were real. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, people are being kidnapped," and started having out-of-body experiences and interviewing people. And I was able to finally leave fear behind. And you will see with the people who are awake contactees, they're fearless people. They are gung-ho, like, let's do this. They have no fear. It's amazing to watch. Contactees have there's very interesting patterns in the contactee population, as to like who's being contacted and why. Boy, I can speak on that because contactees are sort of a recognizable population. They're fearless. They're very nice people. They're super psychic. There's some very interesting patterns there.
Do you have a few examples of maybe some of the more wild experiences that people have had, more compelling cases, things like that? I've listened to a few of your interviews, and I know that, there's been scenarios where people have hit UFOs with their car or something. And you were telling a story about this guy that was with this psychic lady, and the UFOs were chasing her, or not like in a bad way, but they were just interacting with her. And that was an interesting story. Anything like that?
Yeah, well, I love that one. James Santiago. I got to know him very well. I had to tell his story several times. He was an entertainer. He decided to take a road trip along with this crazy psychic lady. He thought she was crazy, but also kind of intrigued by her because she was super psychic and could demonstrate it. And she's like, take a road trip with me across, Canada, across the Canadian Rockies. Because he had to go to do a gig. He was an entertainer, a singer. And she was traveling that direction. He's like, no, I'm not going with you. Are you crazy? I don't do cars. And she convinced him. And they ended up traveling over the Canadian Rockies. And no sooner had, he left with her when she says, you should know I'm being followed by aliens. ETs track me wherever I go. And he thought, oh, this lady is nuts. Because she started saying weird stuff like, do you have any nickel with you, or metal, or what I think it was nickels. And he's like, yeah, I've got change. It's like, well, we need to get rid of it because they use that to track me. And he's like, oh, this lady is nuts. But sure enough, they're driving along and she turns to him and says, do you feel the pressure? And he's like, what are you talking about? She says, the ETs are about to come. This is in the middle of the Canadian Rockies at night. And she's like, I don't think so. And then he felt it. He said it was the weirdest thing. He felt this pressure kind of pressing him into the seat. Well, I've heard this from many people. This is kind of one of the ways they can render someone unable to move. And sure enough, this disc drops down out of the sky and hovers over their car and she pushes the pedal to the metal and she's screeching around these high mountain roads as this emerald green disc is right above the car. I mean, this is a crazy story because she then has him pulling this thing out of the glove compartment, which had a secret compartment, and pulls out this gold bracelet and holds it between them. She says, hold it and put your hands on it, and this will drive the UFO away. I'm not quite sure what to make of this whole story, but this is what happened. And he gets tears in his eyes each time he tells it. I verified everything I could. I know who the lady is. She's now passed away, so is he. But the UFO finally went off for whatever reason. I think they may have been taken, honestly, because when someone has a sighting that is that close, dollars to donuts, they were taken on board. He doesn't have direct evidence of it, but after questioning him extensively, he did have childhood encounters with little humanoids. He fits all the patterns, bruises on his arm and all kinds of close-up UFO sightings. They were taken, whether they know it or not. But afterwards, he's like, what is this bracelet? Because it was huge. You could not fit this on a person's arm. And it had little seafoam green stones on it. And she said, well, this is an Atlantean bracelet. She was an explorer and scuba diver as a young woman. She's a world famous artist. I know exactly who she is. I wish I could say, but she still has family. And she said she found that off the coast of Spain. It's a wild story. Absolutely. But I've got so many accounts. I mean, here's one from a lady at work who walked in and saw my little gray statue on my desk. She screamed. Connie Lopez is her name. She said, "What's that?" I'm like, "Connie, that's a gray alien." She's like, "Oh my God, I saw one of those when I was a younger woman and I had just given birth to my son." I'm like, "Tell me what happened." And she described how she woke up one evening because she heard this weird noise, like fingers scraping against wet glass, sort of a squeaky noise, and woke up and looked out the picture window of her bedroom, and there was a gray alien trying to open the window. This window doesn't open. It's a fixed window to the wall. And her son, who was 6 days old, was in the crib right beneath the window. And that ET is looking at her son and trying to get in. And so she leans up in bed and is about to scream when the ET looks at her. They lock gazes, and it slams her back into her bed. She cannot move. She cannot scream. She said she could feel the tears just coming out of her eyes. She's not happy. This woman was terrified. And this gray ET, your typical gray, big, she said it was about 6 feet tall, so that's sort of on the higher end, but otherwise, the gray skin, the large dark eyes, bald head, oversized, was trying to get into the window. Why it didn't walk through the wall like they often do, I don't know. This case is a little different that way. But it was there for about a minute, she says, and finally just walked off. The paralysis lifted. She jumped up, scooped up her baby, screaming. Her husband flies out of bed, like, "What's wrong?" Like, "I saw this thing. It was trying to get the baby." He's like, "What do you mean this thing?" She says, "It wasn't human. I don't know what it was." He thought she was having a nightmare. She's like, "I wasn't a nightmare. I am leaving in the morning." And she did. She went and stayed at her sister's house for 2 weeks. And she's like, "I'm not coming back unless we get guard dogs. I'm not coming back." And so they did. They bought guard dogs, and she stayed there another 2 weeks and says, "I can't do this, honey. We have to move." And they ended up moving. This is how profoundly an experience can affect somebody. And this is just one of so many cases. Can I share one more?
Absolutely.
Because this one really impressed me. This lady contacted me because, I've never heard anyone describe this being, but you had one in one of your books. And she said that she's a teacher, a daycare worker, really well educated, gave a lucid interview. I'm able to pick her words, described it intensely, knew, and just a really intelligent lady. And does not want her name used. I call her Eleanor. But she was living in O'Fallon, Illinois. This was around 2006. And she likes to wake up early in the morning and go jogging at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. by her house. And so she gets up one morning and she's jogging. She goes down her street, onto another, and then onto a road called Kyle Avenue. And she's going up on her route that she normally takes. And there's a T intersection in front of her. And she's about 100 feet away from it when her dog, who she's jogging with, stops and looks up. And she's thinking, "Oh, it's going to be a deer. It's going to be a raccoon, a fox." And this was a pretty rural area, and she often saw wildlife. And her dog saw it first, and it wasn't any of those. She saw what she thought was a person on stilts walking down the center of Kyle Avenue. It's a fairly busy street during the day, no one there at night. And as it walked under the street light, which was right on the corner, and I found the street corner on Google, I looked it up. There's the street light. She said she saw what was, well, first looked like a grasshopper to her, but as it got under the street light, she saw it was a praying mantis. And she says, "Preston, this thing was 15 feet tall. I know it's 15 feet tall because I saw how high it came up to the street light. And it was taking 6-foot strides, walking purposefully down the center of Kyle Avenue with its head down. And it was scanning the street back and forth as if looking for something. Did not appear to see her. So she's like 100, 150 feet away from this thing, very close. And she and her dog are watching it. It's gray in color, mottled gray, eyes like the size of basketballs, a triangular kind of head. You're a praying mantis, very stick-like limbs, and is just booking it down the street. and was gone in a matter of seconds. And she ran after it. I probably would have turned around myself. I don't know. I don't know how I would react, but God bless her. She took after it, took off after it, and runs up to the T intersection just in time to see it go off into the cornfield. And she ran up to it, and of course it was gone at this point. And that's basically the story. I did find out she has a history of contact, because she was saying, this is a one-off, this has never happened to me. I'm like, well, let's dig into your childhood a little bit. Yeah, she was having contact. She has seen ETs before and since. So, and UFOs close up. So that could be a factor here. And I asked her, is there anything there where this, why would this be here? Because she didn't see a UFO. She said, I don't know. There's a high school. There's a lots of cornfields. The only thing I can think of is this is about 6 miles away as the UFO flies from Scott Air Force Base. That rang a bell for me, because Scott Air Force Base has been implicated in some sightings and, dealing with the UFO phenomena, as many Air Force bases have. But I thought that was a super interesting story, because it confirmed another story I'd gotten, which was from Kevin Cannon, who I mentioned earlier, who did see 15-foot tall praying mantis beings, had a long conversation with them. And that's another amazing account. But I mean, it's endless. So many people are having these experiences. It's not just a few, it's millions. 1 in 40 is what J. Allen Hynek said. And it was a year after that, the Roper organization, which does polling, took a survey and found that about 1 in 50 people show the markers of being a contactee. It's far more widespread than people realize.
Those are awesome stories. Do you know anything about self-initiated contact with ETs? I think it's called CE5.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a good idea? Have you ever done that? What do you think about it?
Yeah, I certainly have done that. In fact, I first heard about that when I wrote an article for UFO Universe magazine. I had interviewed a guy who worked for NBC doing set dressing, and he was working with this guy by the name of Kyle Mann. I think that's his name. Don't quote me on that. I probably have to look that up. I know his name was Kyle. But at any rate, they had gone to Santa Monica, the George Page Museum, the La Brea Tar Pits, to set up a peacock's tail in picture lights, computerized colored lights, to advertise the NBC symbol, a peacock. This was that night, and they set it all up. It looks like a large half disc with colored lights. It looks like a UFO, honestly. And they had no sooner set this thing up and turned on the lights when Arnie Weiler, the guy I interviewed, said 2 UFOs came swooping down and dropped down and were looking at this thing. And he turned to Kyle, gosh, I think that's his name, and said, look, UFOs. And the guy's like, oh, this always happens when I set up these displays, because he's the special effects expert. And I'm like, Arnie, I have to talk to this guy after I got the whole interview from him. And yeah, he gave me his number, and I talked to this guy. He says, oh yeah, this has happened before. I'm like, give me an example. And he said that in 1978, he had set up a green argon laser on the top of what was then the tallest building in San Diego, California. This is like 1978 about. And it no sooner turned it on, and it's flashing in beat to Pink Floyd. And it was a radio station publicity stunt. They had to get permission from the FAA and all this, because this is a laser going up into the sky. So as soon as they turned this thing on, there was 10 people on the top of this building. This a V-shaped craft came right down over as if to investigate. And there was another one, a little smaller one, and we're actually farther away, probably the same size. And they all saw it. It came right over, had made a low buzzing noise. So I wrote this article on those 2 incidents, and I think a few others, called Calling All UFOs. And it was sometime later that Stephen Greer came to LA to promote his CSETI group, which is all about calling down UFOs, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, initiating encounters. and I wasn't going to go because he charged like $300. But oddly, synchronistically, the newspaper called me and said, "We'll pay your way. We don't know why we're doing this, but we want you to write an article. And if we pay your fee to get to this lecture, will you write an article?" Because I'd written an article for the newspaper. And I'm like, "Are you kidding?" Of course. And so that's how I met Stephen Greer. This is 1992, I believe. Yeah, 1992. That's right. August of 1992. And I'm listening to the lecture, and he's describing how to do it. And he's cited those two cases from UFO Universe. I'm like, whoa. He's like, the Preston Dennett here's an article. Here's how you can call down a UFO using lights. And we went out that night after he gave the lecture with a group of about 40 or 50 of us into the hills just by LA. The Santa Susana Pass overlooks the San Fernando Valley for anyone who knows this area. No sooner did we got there, we didn't even do any of the so-called protocols. A UFO showed up. I could not believe my eyes. Some guy shouts, look up. And there was this blob of light moving across the sky. And it was big. I mean, the size of a quarter moon. It was way the heck up there. But it wasn't a balloon, I can tell you that, or anything that I'm aware of in terms of conventional explanations. And it winked out. Boom. So that I was hooked. We went up the next night and had an experience with anomalous lights. And then I became part of that core group in LA, and we called down UFOs on a number of occasions. On one of the best occasions, they were blinking back at us. It was so cool. Yeah, I think that's absolutely a valid tool. And it works. And it's using lights and meditation mostly. Stephen Greer is not the inventor of it, of course. I mean, Sisto Paz Wells was doing this years ago. He's a Peruvian contactee. And many other people have done this in UFO encounters. You can, by just blinking their headlights or something, or wishing for a sighting. I've interviewed a lot of people who are like talking about UFOs. I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if a UFO came down? Boom, it does. So yeah, it's absolutely a valid tool for reaching out to ETs.
So they're picking up on our conscious intention?
Yeah, I think so. They're very much on top of things. They're very aware of people, particularly contactees. Remember, these are very telepathic beings. I never had any sightings until I started investigating. Well, there are a few peculiar events in my childhood, which I wonder about. Nothing major, though. I mean, but I started investigating, and shortly later, I started having sightings. That year, 1992, was huge for me, because just prior to attending Greer's lecture, I had had 2 major sightings. So following that, I had a bunch. They absolutely will pick up on people's thoughts. Part of our C-SETI group. Yeah, there was one lady who said, wouldn't it be nice to see a UFO? A little silver saucer came swooping down. So this is to the extent that they're aware of us. You know, I wrote an article about how UFOs appear over rocket launches and missile launches. I'm thinking, look, they're monitoring our exploration of space, our technology. I found 3 cases of people who launched toy rockets, one in upstate New York, one in Arizona, and one in Nevada, I believe, where they're launching little toy rockets, and UFOs showed up too. So there are various ways that you can kind of call down UFOs, but they're absolutely watching over us very closely.
That's awesome. Maybe they're checking the rockets to see if they have some kind of payload.
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. There's been some interactions on a few cases where people are launching rockets, and who knows what's inside of them. I mean, if you look at the whole Apollo and Gemini program, there's a bunch of NASA insiders who said we were followed to and from the moon. A lot of whistleblowers saying that, and talk about us bringing bombs up to the moon, nuclear bombs to explode on the moon. According to a number of sources, we were basically warned off. Like, no, you're not doing that. There's just no way. And contactees have been told that when a nuclear bomb is exploded, it's affecting interdimensional areas that we're not aware of. It's destroying more than our own planet. You're affecting other levels of reality here, other dimensions. So this is one reason I think why they're so opposed to what we're doing, because we don't know what we're doing.
I got two more questions for you. Is the moon a satellite or something like that? I've heard things about it. Maybe it's hollow, or there's something on the other side. Maybe there's a human base there, maybe an ET base. What do you think?
I think it's a natural satellite. I don't know. I have looked into this because I did interview a gentleman who was part of the Apollo program as a petty photographer who found himself bumped up to a top secret clearance and got to talk to a number of the astronauts firsthand. And he said they were out of their minds because they saw stuff up there that is not human made, flat out. I hadn't really looked into the moon anomalies until I interviewed him. And I thought, I'm not so sure about this guy. But I vetted him. You know, I knew people who knew him well and had UFO sightings with him. He was a contactee as well, turns out. But so he's saying all this stuff. I'm like, wow, okay, let's look into this. And I started researching the moon, and of course found out there's something called TLP, transient lunar phenomena, which is scientifically verified. And these are lights on the moon, basically, which go back to the 1600s. And we're seen since then and regularly, and not just random lights. I mean, sometimes very much intentional or intelligent. And if you start looking at all the whistleblowers and all the NASA insiders and all the reports, every statement the astronauts have made, trying to read into what they've said, yeah, there's stuff up there, no doubt. There are some photographs that are absolutely amazing. I've had a number of contactees been telling me that they've been told or even shown stuff on the moon. Certainly that happened to Dolly Saffron. They took her right up there, said, yes, we had bases on the moon. Not human bases so much. If they wouldn't last long because the gamma radiation is going to fry you to a crisp. But yeah, there's no doubt that there's stuff up on the moon that NASA is withholding. NASA means never a straight answer. I didn't make that up. That was reporters long ago who were complaining about the conflicting information and the withholding of information from NASA directly. So yeah, I think the moon is a natural satellite. There has been a lot of UFO activity there. A lot of contactees have said it, a lot of NASA insiders. That's going to be a big breaking story at some point. If that ever comes out, there's time before we annihilate ourselves. Or yeah,
I hope so.
No doubt something going on there.
Anything about Mars that you know of? I know we've seen pictures of, doorways and what look like crash sites and monoliths and the face, all that.
Yeah, well, the Phobos monolith I thought was pretty impressive. And I think that is a possibility that is a structure, because if you look at it and you can see pictures of this, that is incredibly symmetrical. In terms of the Martian face, I think that's probably pareidolia, honestly. By that, I mean, we have a tendency to see faces and shapes in clouds, tree trunks, land formations. And if you look at all the photographs of the quote Martian face, which is so enormous, for that to be a carving would be beyond belief. So I'm not really a believer in the Martian face. And I think this is where we're getting an enormous amount of disinformation about what's going on Mars. Because people are talking about super soldiers, and I was a warrior on Mars, and I was regressed to, I was taken at age 10, and I lived my life on Mars. And I'm not sure about some of those stories, because you cannot live on Mars. It has no magnetic field. You can look this up. It's scientifically proven information. You would be fried to a crisp in a day or two. You cannot spend a year on Mars, even way deep underground. So a lot of these stories coming out are demonstrably not true. And it could be that these people are victims of my labs, military abductions. Could be they're trying to make a buck. I don't want to, rain on anyone's parade. If they want to tell their story, that's their prerogative. But I personally am skeptical of those stories for the reasons stated. It's just not possible. And if you go on the internet and you see all these people showing figures running across Mars and domes and doorways, and CGI is rampant these days. And photographs of UFOs and videos and structures are not great evidence anymore, unless you have multiple witnesses or someone who's willing to sign an affidavit, give a face-to-face interview, because the disinformation and misinformation and outright lies is absolutely out of control on the subject, particularly with the planet Mars. I'm not a fan of that. I find it a little upsetting, honestly, because anyone with a basic knowledge of science can say, no, there's not life on Mars. Just isn't. It can't happen.
Well, I like your logical, investigative approach, and I think it's really important work. So for anyone who wants to find you, reach out to you, or purchase your books or anything, I know you have a website. Go ahead and mention what that is, and then anywhere else you want to send people.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I appreciate it. My website, if you punch my name in, it should take you there. It's prestondennett.weebly.com. You can reach me through my website or on pretty much any social media platform like Twitter or Instagram or Facebook. My books are available on Amazon. So yeah, you can get my research there. I also have a YouTube channel if you're not really into reading. I do present most of my research. I try to keep up. It's hard on my YouTube channel. But yeah, I really appreciate you having me on the show. This is an important subject. I think we're at a new era here where people are finally beginning to wake up and realize that this is real. So I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about this. I love it.
Of course. Thanks for coming on.
Truly an honor and a pleasure. Thank you.